Hello, everyone. Trust you're all well and safe at home. And with lockdown restrictions easing, some of you must be moving out. But the important thing is to move out very safely, keeping your health in mind. And that's really what is the topic of discussion today, because moving out safely means avoiding public transport as much as possible. Trains are not working in many places. In most places, buses have got sporadic service. But again, people are worried whether they should be taking public transport. And that's what we're going to be talking about today on Interact, brought to you by Reliance General Insurance and all of us at Autocar, whether you should be considering a switch to private vehicles and not be taking public transport anymore in these pandemic times. Of course, there are a lot of implications to that. It's not so easy, but the whole debate is public to private transport. So we'll be talking about a whole bunch of things. We'll be talking about what are the options you have. Clearly, the best thing to do is get your own vehicle, get your own space. Social distancing, very, very important. In a car, if you're driving on your own, that is very possible. But what sort of car should you get? Clearly, you don't need a big SUV, especially if you are going to be driving to what is typically a crowded place. One of the reasons why you took the convenience of public transport, to avoid the hassles of traffic and parking and that sort of thing. Or should you be taking a two-wheeler? Because I think a two-wheeler is actually the most convenient form of transportation. We'll be talking about that as well. And I've got with me Rishaad Mody, our two-wheeler editor and the go-to man for all things on two wheels, to tell you about what options you have. So before we take your questions, I want to just touch upon a few things on what cars you need to be looking at, and then what two-wheelers you need to be looking at. I'll be giving it to Rishaad. But look, if you're looking at cars, I think the sensible thing to do is to look at a small car, because clearly, from a commuting point of view, that is the most convenient thing to do, especially because you don't want to be stuck in traffic. You want something that's nimble in traffic. You will be stuck in traffic, of course. Something that is easy to drive, light controls. There are a lot of affordable automatic cars out there, affordable fuel efficient automatic cars out there, and maybe that's what you should be looking at if you're buying new. The other option is to be buying used as well. And there are a lot of options there as well, because clearly the used car market, we are seeing some activity in that. A lot of people are looking at replacing public transport with a used car, because clearly affordability is an issue, for most people who use public transport. So there are a lot of good options there as well in terms of affordable cars. And I think the most convenient form of transportation, what I told you, is a two-wheeler. Again, new versus old. I'm going to hand you over to Rishaad. And before we go forward, you can just send in all your questions. But over to you, Rishaad, and just give us your thoughts on the two-wheeler side of it.
Thanks, Hormazd. Well, yes, as you said, two-wheelers incredibly convenient and they're very affordable. As affordable as a used car, maybe a two-wheeler is always going to be more affordable than that. At least one for the sake of commuting and transport. Now, the interesting thing is there's a lot to consider here, because in the last 2 years, it's not been a good time for the two-wheeler market. Prices have gone up by up to 30% as a compound factor of various government regulations, new rules coming in. All these things come together have made two-wheelers expensive. Now, we knew that this was going to be a lull time, but then came the pandemic. So that really made things a lot more complicated. Nevertheless, it still stands that a two-wheeler is the most practical in terms of affordability solution for you. How do you go about this? Do you buy new? Do you buy used? Well, like I said, new two-wheelers have gotten expensive, especially the BS6 ones. The used market is really going to see a big pickup right now. And that is a very practical way to look at things. In terms of leasing, well, I think the car market itself has a very small section of leasing, and it's almost non-existent for two-wheelers. There are places that will rent you a motorcycle or a scooter for a short time. But these are businesses that have generally been created for leisure rides. Someone who wants to rent a bike and ride up to Ladakh or go for a weekend ride. That was the idea. They have expanded it a little bit. You can hire a bike for maybe a month or so if that's your need. But essentially, you're looking at a new two-wheeler or a used two-wheeler. That's your basic set of options. And as your questions come in, we'll help you find what is the right solution for you. Over to you, Hormazd.
Thanks, Rishaad. And I think you raised a good point, which I missed, is that, two-wheelers have become more expensive. Even cars have become more expensive because what got missed in this whole pandemic was the shift from BS4 to BS6, which happened on April 1. Which was when the lockdown was, fully in place and everyone was really engulfed. The whole world has been engulfed by this horrible pandemic. So I think, with BS6, with the new emission technology, prices have gone up. So clearly a big gap now between new BS6 car and a used BS4 car. So again, that of course, as Rishaad said, you have options of new versus used. But again, a lot of people do want new cars, and there's some pretty good, affordable new cars, fuel efficient, convenient to drive with automatics, which are available. But we'll keep taking your questions, and I think now we'll move to your questions. And we've got one straight off. In fact, we got a whole bunch of questions coming in, and we've got one first, starting off with Siddharth, who says, with the switch from public to private transport, do you think CNG should be promoted more aggressively as it's cleaner? Also, should mass transit like buses be done away with and only autos and cabs be retained? Well, I think firstly, this whole CNG thing, yeah, it is cleaner, but for a long time, the network just hasn't kept up as it should have. We've been pushing CNG for the last 20 years, but unfortunately, the infrastructure isn't in place. So not very practical from that point of view. Yes, it is a clean fuel, but don't forget today's BS6 cars, both petrols and diesels, are very clean themselves because the pollution levels have come down dramatically with these new emission standards. So I wouldn't bat too much for CNG. If you want it, it's purely from a running cost perspective. But there are disadvantages of CNG. One is, the infrastructure is not in place. You might have to queue up to tank up, and also the drivability, the ease of driving is not there. So I think that's where it is with CNG. I'm going to take another question from Nihal, who says, don't you think this will cause an even bigger spike in road traffic, an issue many cities in India are already grappling with? Now, that's really a very good question and a bit of a conundrum over here because, to encourage private vehicles when the whole world is encouraging, when typically everyone was encouraging public transport as a much more efficient, cleaner, and a more responsible way of commuting, especially in overcrowded cities. But, these are extraordinary times. And I would imagine that a lot of people will be working from home. That's the new normal. That's the new way forward. A lot of organizations are even gearing up, downsizing offices because they know a certain percentage of their workforce will be working from home. So the sense I get is, the increase in people moving from public to private transport might be offset by a lot of people staying at home as well. But, who knows? That's really, we will know in the future. We've got Shreyas, who's asking, if we are to opt for private transport, do you think it would be wiser to switch to EVs or maybe even bicycles as prices of cars and fuels continue to rise? To be honest, both options, yes, very clean, but both options completely impractical on both ends of the spectrum. I mean, EVs, yes, you can get, but they're very, very expensive still. Coincidentally, I'm just driving a Kona EV right now as my daily driver. I'm absolutely loving it. Haven't had to visit a fuel pump in months. As in a way, I've beaten the big fuel price hikes. But it is a very expensive vehicle. It's around 30 lakhs on road. So I don't know whether that's a viable option. Then bicycles, honestly, in our climate, in our conditions, it's good for short commutes. But, if you were typically taking a train or something which is 40 kilometers, not practical at all. And with that, we've got a question from Soham Rishaad, which I will toss to use. He's asking, are bike prices set to rise after the COVID crisis? You did answer that somewhat, but I don't know if COVID has some sort of an impact on it. Over to you.
So it's actually an interesting question because the way I see it is that some manufacturers have priced their BS6 products with a tentative pricing to offset some of the shock and may have planned to increase that price slightly down the road. Other manufacturers, Piaggio for example, tell us that their BS6 range of Vespas and Aprilias is a fixed price. It will not change for the rest of this year. So that was the original plan. But the way things have gone right now, how bad the market has gotten, I don't know if these manufacturers can afford to do that or how long they can defer that price increase that is coming. On the other hand, because of the whole confusion between BS4 to BS6, the deadline, a lot of dealers ended up registering their vehicles in their own names and are now trying to get rid of those vehicles. So it's going to take some homework, it's going to take some work on your part to see who has what available and what deals they're willing to give it to you at. And I think you would do well to start looking now, because there may be some of those old BS4 vehicles that are still available for sale. You may end up being the second buyer of them, but you'll buy it off the dealer. It'll have no kilometers run on it, and you'll probably get all the benefits of being a first time owner. Over to you, Hormazd.
Thanks, Rishaad. I'm going to go to the next question, which is again to do with cars. So I will take that. It is basically a very relevant question again, with the prices of petrol and diesel so close now. Is buying a diesel car just not feasible anymore, as our running will be limited during the COVID crisis? Absolutely. I mean, right now, especially at the low end, it doesn't make sense, buying a diesel car if your running is very low. But remember that diesel has the advantage of around 20 to 25% better fuel efficiency. But again, it really depends on your running, and the fact that diesel now, no one would have thought that would ever happen in India, is more expensive than petrol. You really need to be running a lot to kind of firstly offset the higher price of the fuel by the better fuel efficiency. So you need a lot of running for that. And as you rightly said, if it's going to be just short hops, occasional hops, because if after the COVID crisis is going to be a combination of going to office occasionally and working mainly from home, your running will be that much more limited. So clearly, in that sense, a petrol makes more sense. Getting a question from Vineet, who asks, using public transport is better for the environment and an increase in private vehicles will cause a spike in pollution. What's your take on that? Well, absolutely right. As we said earlier, public transport is a far more efficient, cleaner way to, go about, especially, in urban cities like that. I mean, the public transport is absolutely vital. But don't forget, in today's age of social distancing, it is a safety concern, a health concern, and that's really what the world is grappling with right now. Hopefully, there will be some balance where the combination of increasing the number of cars on the road, as well as people working from home, as I said earlier, will not cause too much of a spike in traffic. That's one can hope for. And the other thing also is that we are just cars are just getting cleaner and cleaner. So hopefully, with the newer fleet of cars replacing the older ones, the impact on pollution will not be that much. But typically, public transport definitely a cleaner option. I've got Taranchu asking, do you think fleet cars should be only public transport made vehicle at this time, or other mass transit systems may pose too big a risk? Well, frankly, this goes beyond our scope. It's more a question for the authorities. But I think logically, it's all about social distancing. So one has to assume that in mass transport, in buses and trains, you will be that much closer to people around you, and hence carry a greater risk of infection or infecting someone else. Whereas in cars, it may not be there so much of a risk. But again, these are kind of guidelines. We'll have to go with what the authorities advise us. Vibhav says, with private transport, you can travel as per your convenience, but how economical will it be? I mean, it's hard to answer that question. It really depends on your running, the kind of car you have, and the kind of usage pattern you are going to have as well. So, if it's going to be a small car, which is very fuel efficient, and your running is very minimal, of course, your fuel consumption or your running costs will be much cheaper and be quite economical. But if you're going long commutes, obviously it would be more. So again, all depends on your running costs. I've got Alan Shibu again asking, do you think EVs will become popular and possibly more affordable after the COVID crisis? Well, of course, I think what the COVID crisis has shown is that the impact on the environment with the lockdown has been very positive. A lot of us have been able to see horizons which we never saw before because they were covered in smog and pollution. But clearly, vehicular traffic has proven to be a culprit, because with it off the road, the air quality has improved dramatically. But having said that, I would say a big part of the problem is the older vehicles. I always say that 90% of the pollution comes from a really old 10 to 20% of the fleet. These really old cars which are still not off the road, they cause the pollution. The newer generation of cars, especially BS6, are much, much cleaner. Uh, Rishad, another bike question. So I'm going to toss it to you. It's Suhas who is asking, what should I look for when picking a good motorcycle for my daily commute? I think it's a question a lot of people would want to know. And, I think that's something which I'm sure our readers would be interested in knowing as well.
So that's an interesting question because what your perspective of a good motorcycle is might be quite different from my perspective of a good motorcycle. But I think since you're asking from a daily commute and you want to keep your running as affordable as possible, you want to look at something from the 110cc to 125cc bracket. I'd suggest you go slightly towards the 125cc's because you get a little bit more performance, but you also get features like disc brakes, which really make a difference. You even will get ABS with some motorcycles. You get 5-speed gearboxes. And if you're doing a daily commute of maybe 30, 40 kilometers from the suburbs into the city, a motorcycle like that will make a big difference. Beyond that, you want to look at what fits you right. What motorcycle is comfortable for you, what motorcycle is conveniently located to you in terms of service and infrastructure, because all these things are things to consider now in the current COVID environment. Look at anything in the 125cc segment for pure practicality. 150cc would be where you're looking at for a little more performance. But like I said, prices have gone up everywhere, and it's going to be hard for you to find a bike below 80 to 90,000 rupees if you go up to the 150cc segment. So that is something to consider.
Rishad, I'll stick with you because we've got another question from Sonal who's asking, considering a motorcycle doesn't exactly offer protection from the elements, how secure would one be from catching the virus when using a bike for daily commutes? I mean, one assumes that you are going to be wearing a proper helmet, so that's some sort of protection with the visor and all that. But, just your thoughts. I'm sure this is something, being a biker, you're also worried about. I mean, any special tips on protecting yourself, because you've got and you're jostling within traffic. You've got bikers like barely 3 feet or 4 feet away from you. So clearly that can be a concern.
To be honest, Sonal, this is something I was struggling with in the build up to the lockdowns lifting because I got comfortable at home, I felt safe at home, and I didn't really want to go out. But then talking to people who are experts in the field, and you understand that your biggest risk is indoors, and when you're outdoors, your risk factor is much lower. Now, there are certain things, like Hormazd said, you really need to do. You must wear a full face helmet or at least an open face helmet with a proper visor, which will act as a face shield. Try and stay away from traffic jams. You know your routes, you know your timings on your commute. Try and change your work hours so that you make sure you're not stuck in a traffic jam, a predictable traffic jam. Try and change your commute route. That helps as well. Basic safety is essentially back down to the same rules of social distancing and hygiene. Try and keep away from people. Make sure you're keeping yourself clean. Being on a motorcycle can be hot and sweaty in many cities like Mumbai, especially. So try not to touch your face. It's a very involuntary reflex action. It happens to me quite often. So make sure that you're sanitizing your hands, not touching your face. When you get home, whatever's been out there, keep it away from your children, your pets, things like that. It's small things you just have to think about what could be the issues I face and how to get around them. But with a little planning and with that helmet, which is very useful again, you should be fine. In fact, we've actually just done a video on how you can get out and ride safely. You'll find it on the Autocar YouTube channel. I suggest you go give that a watch.
Thanks, Rishad. Very, very useful tips over there. And I guess even wearing gloves, I mean, most bikers do it, but I think that at least gives you some form of protection because today you see everyone wearing gloves, normal surgical gloves. But I think the whole idea is, you don't want to get your hands contaminated and stuff like that. So I would imagine a good pair of gloves also is part of the so-called kit.
Absolutely. In fact, the riding gear is now playing one more role. The jackets and the gloves is just giving you another level of protection and just another reason for you to gear up, keep yourself protected on the bike because now is a time you really want to be safe when you're riding a motorcycle.
Great, Rishad. Thanks a lot. Back to cars. We've got Rohan Pardeshi who's asking us, for someone who has never had a vehicle in the family, what would you suggest they go for? A new or a used car? I mean, it's a good question because, if you want to start off, it really depends on your budget, to be honest. But I think basically, if you buy a used car, you can get a slightly bigger, better car, a higher variant, something a little bit more plush. But the question is, do you really need that if you're just going to be yourself commuting? I would say it might make sense if you don't mind stretching a bit, going for a new car, because you get the latest technology. They're all BS6 right now. Chances are that all used cars are going to be BS4, because BS6 is just about 3 months on the road. Though some companies have been giving BS6 cars for a long time, especially like Maruti. They started a long time back, so you could have some car BS6 used cars of those in the market. But again, nothing that's going to be more than a year old. So they would tend to be you won't get an older BS6 car. So BS4 cars would definitely be a lot cheaper, but I think a BS6 car going forward, it's you're kind of protected because you've got the latest emission regulation in it, and especially in places like the NCR and all, where they take a dim view of an emission regulation that's not the latest. You don't want to be caught out in any regulation which kind of penalizes that. And I think with if you're looking at a small car, your budget, it's you don't have to spend a lot. There are some really good cars out there. I think Maruti is a company that's really strong now, because they play to the lower end of the budget end of the market. A wide choice of cars over there. With a lot of convenience features and fuel efficiency, even automatics available. You've got Hyundai as well playing in that area, Tata Motors as well. But I think so. I would say go for a new car, go for a small new car, because it's easy to drive, it doesn't stress you, and frankly, you're just going to be commuting in town, so you don't need anything big or special. Rishaad, I'll toss that to you. What would you suggest in terms of new and used bike, or do you think the new bikes have become so much more expensive that as a percentage that they are much more than what a used bike would be right now, and maybe it doesn't make sense getting a new bike?
Hormazd, unfortunately, that is the case especially in terms of the affordable motorcycles, because the expensive ones already had things like fuel injection, and it wasn't a big jump for them, and it's not really noticeable. But when you're going from something that used to cost 50,000 rupees a year ago and now costs 75,000 rupees, and then you pay your taxes and you're paying about 1 lakh on road, it's a challenge. But the same advantages apply. If you buy something that is as recent as a year and a half to 2 years old, you will get ABS. So don't buy something that's too old, because I firmly believe that ABS is a lifesaver. And no matter how fast you or slow you think you're riding, it really can make a difference, because things happen like that on the road. And even if you're traveling at 40 kilometers an hour, ABS can make the difference between staying on your bike and falling off. Buying a BS6 motorcycle, definitely the same advantages. You're polluting less. We've all gotten much more aware of what's happening around us and how the lockdowns have affected the pollution we all breathe. So there is that factor. It's going to be a much more long-lasting motorcycle. It will fetch you more on the long run. So there are advantages to buying BS6 motorcycles. There's also the fact that many manufacturers have thrown in more features, especially Honda with their BS6 motorcycles, to try and make the package more attractive. So you are going to be missing out on all that if you buy a used bike. So there are plus and minus points. If you can find the money, definitely please buy a BS6 motorcycle.
Right. And Rishaad, there's a follow-up question again from Rohan Pardeshi, specifically on bikes, and it is, how safe is it to buy a used two-wheeler, and what does one look for when buying a used bike? Now, I think this question doesn't apply to these times. It's a general question which could apply at any point. But again, it would be great to just give our audience some tips, because really, I think used vehicles is a pretty hot topic right now, given the situation where people just don't want to be spending too much.
Absolutely, Hormazd. So the interesting thing here is you have three basic avenues to buying a used vehicle. You go out to a used bike dealer, you find someone online, or you use one of the new online portals. Now, as we've all found with this time in life, the internet has proved to be extremely helpful in life. And these online portals are doing some really interesting things. They're helping you out with paperwork. Some of them do tests and inspections on the vehicles. Some of them even give you a buyback policy if you're not happy with the bike you bought. So I would say it is worth maybe looking at what's available online and seeing what kind of deals you get there. The reason behind this is, if you're not mechanically inclined, you need to be really careful with what you're buying, or make sure you take a mechanic to inspect that motorcycle that you're interested in buying. With the online thing, you've got so many advantages. You may be paying a little bit more, but it's worth doing that. What to look for when buying a used bike? Well, don't buy anything older than 5 years old. The newer it is, the better, like we just addressed in the earlier question. And don't walk away from a deal that's a little more expensive than the earlier deal if the bike is in better condition, especially if you plan to keep it for a long time. This is actually a topic that we did a full story on, and you'll find it on the Autocar India website, much more detailed than I can tell you right now.
Thanks, Rishaad. Don't go away. I mean, I'm just going to come back to you, or keep coming back to you, because a lot of bike queries. But and there's one which is basically for cars and bikes. I'll take the car bit. It's Vinil asking if we can share any tips on what first-time car or motorcycle buyers should bear in mind. Well, I think from a first-time car buyer, one assumes that you've not had too much driving experience, so you want something that's going to be easy to drive and doesn't tax you too much. So what you need is something a little compact, where you can see the extremities of your car, so it doesn't challenge your judgment, or, to be honest, your lack of it when you start out driving. So a compact car makes more sense. A car with a high seating position also makes more sense, because when you're more elevated, you get better visibility, and that also improves your judgment. Good to have a car with light controls, where the clutch is not heavy, steering is not heavy, because it just takes the stress out of driving, especially in traffic. Good thing to go straight for an automatic, because the convenience of an automatic, again, it doesn't tax you. And go for something which I think is quite fuel efficient, and is fairly reliable as well. So I think these are just the broad tips one would give on what kind of car you should get. Don't try and overstretch yourself. It's very tempted. Cars are a very emotional thing. You might want a really big car with all the bells and whistles. That's fine, but I think as your first car, let's be honest, especially in our cities, you're likely to pick up some dings, nicks, scratches. It's very painful if the car is expensive, and you pick up a scratch or a dent, which is highly possible. Parking is also an issue. So start off small. Start enjoying the whole idea of driving. Get comfortable, get experience before you go up. So I would always say, for a first-time buyer, don't be overambitious in what you want. Stick to something that's convenient, easy to drive, and doesn't challenge your driving skill. That's the most important point, because when you start driving, obviously you don't have the experience, and it's only with experience that you get more comfortable behind the wheel, and that's the time to get into something a bit more exciting. Rishaad, over to you on the bike side.
Weber, from a first time buyer's perspective, I would imagine you're wondering whether you should buy a scooter or a motorcycle. And they both have their advantages. I would say scooter for shorter distances, motorcycle if you're going to be commuting longer distances. A scooter can be shared with your family members. Generally, motorcycles is more of a personal thing. Scooters, advantages, storage, convenience. It's an automatic. It's much easier to ride, just like Hormazd was saying just now. First time, maybe you'll be more comfortable without having to deal with gears. The disadvantage with scooters is small wheels means they're not as stable. Generally, scooter suspension is not as comfortable as motorcycle suspension, and a scooter will not be as fuel efficient as a motorcycle, because that automatic CVT transmission does take away some of the efficiency. In terms of a motorcycle, much better suspension comfort, much more efficiency, better for covering long distances. So again, if you're looking at a 50, 60 kilometer daily commute, you probably want to go for a motorcycle. Now, what motorcycle do you buy? Again, if it's pure transport, a 125cc motorcycle will do well for you. Today's 125cc bikes are quite nice. You've got a range of them. Honda's come out with something more sporty like the SP 125. Bajaj has the classic Pulsar 125. If you want something really sporty, you're not interested in fuel efficiency, you can even buy a KTM Duke 125, which goes all the way up. What I will tell you is that be aware that running costs go up with the capacity of the motorcycle. Various things apply. You may move on to disc brakes. You have to consider the running costs of pads. Bigger tires will get consumed fast. Bigger tires will cost more to replace. So larger motorcycles, more service costs, more running costs. But basically, first time, just for commuting, stick to a motorcycle 125cc, or stick to a scooter if it's just a short runabout for you.
Thanks, Rishaad. Great tips over there. And we've got Abhishek asking you a specific question. We talked about riding gloves. So Abhishek says, Rishaad, how would you suggest sanitizing riding gloves and palm grips on a ride? The most important contact points, which they are. So, I mean, is there any way to clean them? That sort of thing. Obviously, certain solutions like alcohol. I mean, there can be stuff which is actually harm the plastics and rubber parts of a bike, and your gloves as well, the fabrics.
So, Abhishek, what I do is I generally sanitize the grips of my motorcycle first thing before I head out, because I know that someone else may have touched it while it was being parked, or the security guard when he washed it. So, just the first time before I ride the bike, I do give it a very light sanitizing. But again, I'm in my full gear all the time, so I'm not really touching much with the motorcycle. As for my gloves, it depends on what gloves they are. In my case, I've got quite a few pairs of gloves, so I tend to circle between them. But light soap water solution is considered the best way to do it. Alcohol may not have a very good effect on the leather or the fabric in the long run. So it's better to just give it a light wash and air them out. Don't use them. If you've got two pairs of gloves, fantastic. Or if you have just one pair of gloves, again, make sure you don't touch your face with it. Make sure you wash your hands properly after you use them. That goes without saying for whatever you're doing. And I think that's about it. It's basically just try to avoid contact with your face with your gloves. Beyond that, you should be all right.
Great, Rishaad, and I think we are running out of time, but I'm just going to take one more question, which is I think a lot of people are asking this question: can we expect any discounts on cars and bikes in the time to come because of dropping demand after COVID? So it's a very interesting question. A lot of people ask this, but the problem is that yes, there is low demand as well. Demand because people are just not buying anything right now. I mean, everyone's really worried. Economy's taken a hit. Consumers are holding tight, so demand isn't great. It's quite low. But at the same side, even the supply, there are challenges as well. So it's both a demand and supply issue. Now, supply also is a problem because the supply chain is completely disrupted because of the lockdown. The workforce has gone away. They can't come back. Everyone's operating at 10-20%. So the companies can't even produce products at the old rate. They're running at a very, very low rate of plant capacity utilization, and clearly they can't make products any quicker or in a greater quantity. So that automatically has an impact on let's say prices, because when do you get discounts is when there's an oversupply, when the supply exceeds the demand. But here it's in a way slightly matched. So I think yes, you can get deals, but don't expect fantastic deals, because the customers are not sitting on a huge OEMs or the manufacturer are not sitting on huge inventory to kind of which are desperate to offload it. Also, don't forget, a lot of manufacturers cleared off their BS4 stock, and when they started out with BS6, they've been a lot more prudent in kind of stocking vehicles. So I think discounts are there, but they're not going to be they're not very huge right now. Maybe at the time of the festive season, when things start opening up, the economy starts getting better, people start buying, and let's say if the factories start humming normally, I think that's a time you could look at that, because first the supply needs to be in place. We've heard of so many factories where people have got been cases of COVID positive and they've had to shut down. So these sort of disruptions are going to constantly happen. We don't see it kind of normalizing in the next few months. So I think it will be a while before things get back to normal. Rishaad, I think on the bikes, I would imagine it's a sort of similar situation.
It's very similar. Any manufacturer I speak to is talking about how the supply chain A has been disrupted, and B doesn't know how things will resume smoothly. Some days you can work, some days you can't. So it's very unpredictable at the moment. I don't think it's fair to expect discounts at the moment. It depends on what's happening at a dealer level, is what I'd say. It depends on what stocks your dealer is sitting on and how fast they want to get rid of those stocks. So if you look around, you may find some deals, but I wouldn't rely on it right now. And like you said, Hormazd, it's looking like it's going to be the festive season that we have to look forward to.
Great. So I think with that, it's a wrap on Interact, brought to you by Reliance General Insurance and all of us at Autocar. It's been great interacting with you all, and thanks for sending in your questions. Obviously, a lot of you all anxious. I'm sure a lot of you, like us, want things to get back to normal, but I think we are headed for a new normal, and I think I think the main thing is we a lot of us have changed the way we live our lives, and even that means the way we ride and our bikes and drive our cars. That's all changing as well. And just thanks for joining us, and all of you all be safe and stay healthy. Thank you.